Today I am in Teams with Iata's Clayton. Karen, would you introduce yourself, tell us your role for Iata and what is brilliant about your job? So I'll let you roll.
Oh, well, thank you first for having me. So my role, my title is General Counsel and Corporate Secretary for Iata, and the listeners will know that Iata is the trade association of the world's commercial airlines, representing roughly 290 at the last count of global airlines and representing around 80% of the world's traffic volume. General Counsel and Corporate Secretary covers a whole vast array of different things. So let me just unpack the different teams that sit underneath my leadership, if you will, here at Iata. So the couple of things that do as they say on the tin. So Corporate Secretary, I'm in charge of all the corporate governance, the frameworks, the reporting to the board interactions and things like that. General Counsel, well, clearly I am also responsible for all the legal activity support that we give to Iata and obviously to our members as a whole as well. And then what you wouldn't know from the title, what also sits underneath me is, well, there's a couple of other elements. So I have the corporate strategy for Iata, which is essentially the strategy for the airline industry. So that's very, very exciting. And also membership. So I am in charge with my team in relation to looking after the going in, getting members, bringing them on board, looking after them, and then, if necessary, obviously the end part to that journey as well in terminations and us parting ways. And also I'm in charge of what we call here the Enterprise Project Management Office, so which is where we look at programs across the Iata piece, which are additional projects in relation to work that we need to do on behalf of our members, but are in addition to the operational activities that we perform. So that's the gambit of my role. And of course, as that role, I'm also on the executive team at Iata as well. So I sit on a team which I think is around about 15, 16 people, which obviously reports into the Director General. And obviously the role of that team, as the listeners will know, is to lead Iata as an organisation and to ensure that we are achieving our vision and our mission.
That is wonderful. It sounds like a really thrilling role, actually, because it's so varied and involved in so many aspects of what Iata does. Can you walk me through a little bit about what you did? Because I understand you have had a very interesting and varied career to date. So what did you do before you got to do the role that you're doing now? Because that may be of value for anyone who's considering doing what you're doing.
Sure, yes. Well, you talk about it being varied. It's varied in some parts and probably more around things like where I've worked and different industries that I've worked in, rather than perhaps the more conservative upbringing and education that I had. But very quickly, just to outline the structural piece of that. So I'm 47, 48 in December. So, you know, in the prime of my life, can I say, and in the prime of my career. So essentially, normal girl from a normal upbringing and normal education. So went to school, went to university, did a law degree at university, trained at a law firm in London, became a solicitor in London, and then went in-house as an in-house lawyer in business, in an energy business, and then ultimately moved into aviation at some point. So that's the structural piece. What I think is more important are the things that have actually defined that structure and how I've got to this role that I'm doing today. And so there are a couple of guiding principles, if you will, that I've always followed throughout my career, which I think are the important bits to the question that you've asked. And the first one is around that I've always been very clear in my own mind with what I wanted to achieve. So what my ultimate career goals were. And I have therefore always made decisions along the way in my career about achieving that longer term goal. And you will always hear me with my team when we talk about development say to them, well, where do you want to be in 5-10 years time? Because once you have an idea of that, you can always work backwards from it to see what you need to do to be able to get there. So the second thing that I've always done, I think, and which is why I think the variety comes in, is that I've always made some bold decisions actually about my career. And as I said before, particularly for me, it's about having moved countries a number of times. It's about having moved from professional services, a law firm, into an in-house role. And then it's actually also moving industries. So having spent, say, 13 years in one industry, in energy, then taking the, I think, quite bold decision to move industry into aviation. So those couple of things have really shaped what I have done and have actually allowed me then to really be able to take advantage of some of the opportunities that have come along. Another thing which I think I've always tried to do, and I would obviously advocate for, is always be looking for those opportunities and taking them. And so always wanting to stretch myself outside of the comfort zone. So yes, a qualified lawyer, yes, worked in private practice as a lawyer, but as we talked about before, with the stuff that I'm doing in Iata, some of it is very unloyally. And also at times, it's a bit flying by the seat of your pants as well. But, it's pushing yourself to be able to broaden your skill set and to understand the business in a better way. And then I think the other final thing I'd say is I have always tried, not always been successful, but I've always tried to back myself. So always tried to have confidence in what I can do and my abilities, even though sometimes that's been, quite frightening. And always surrounding myself with great people. So that goes to family, that goes to friends, but that also goes to the teams that I've created and also the leaders that I've worked with. I have had experiences before where the leaders that I have worked for just did not have the same values as I did, or, how we had difficult relationships, and being able to see that, try to work your way through it, but actually take the decision at the end of the day. If it wasn't going to work, then, you needed to take other action. Again, back to a bold decision. So those are probably the things that I would say I have done along the way with my structural sort of like background to get to where I am today.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And what I'm hearing is a very open mind to what comes in and the importance of relationships around and having those really coherent relationships that align with your own personal values. On that, there's a very exciting project that I know that you're very involved with Iata, which is 25 in 25. Could you let us know a little bit about what that is?
Yes, well, this was, thank you for asking, by the way, because it is very, very close to my heart and a big thing for Iata and for the aviation industry as a whole, I think. So this initiative, it's a voluntary initiative. It was born just after the AGM, the Iata AGM that we had in Seoul in June 2019. At that AGM and our commercial event afterwards, we had our first inaugural Diversity and Inclusion Awards. And it ranged from recognizing individuals, but also teams and also airlines as to the great work that they were doing in that space. And I will never forget the moment, because I've been at Iata for about 8 weeks, had just delivered my first thankfully successful AGM as corporate secretary, so was rather relieved. Went to the Diversity and Inclusion Awards, and my old employer, Air New Zealand, won the team award for diversity and inclusion, and so it should, because it had done some fantastic things in that space. I remember my ex-CEO Christopher Luxon getting up to accept the award, and he basically laid down the challenge to the industry about, we're talking about this a lot, I'm hearing it all the time, but things are not moving as they should do. So let's stop talking, let's start action. And I want to be back here next year, and actually we've moved the dial on these things. So it was a real rallying call. And on the flight home from Seoul back to Geneva, I was brainstorming with my great colleague Jane Hoskinson, who's our Director of Learning and Development here at Iata. And to be fair to her, it was her brainchild, this 25 by 2025. She came up with it and the snappy snap line. And it just sounded brilliant, because what it is, it's a commitment, voluntary commitment from both our member airlines and now wider actually, and IATA, to ensure that not only are we getting more female representation at the senior ends of the organisations and the airlines, but we are also making sure that on IATA's governance bodies, which obviously sit across the industry, we are also having more female representation. So what we're committing to, both from an IATA perspective and also from an airline perspective, is that by 2025, so only a few years away, we have increased, for example, female representation in certain areas of our organisations, either up to 25% or by 25%. So it encourages those airlines who are already doing really well, because they want to do another 25% on top of where they're already at. But it also encourages the airlines who are maybe a little bit just starting out on their journey in this respect, and trying to bring them up the pole as well. And the initiative also, one of the other very important parts of the initiative is that there should be some benchmarking, and there should be some sharing of information, sharing of data, so that we can get a good wealth of best practices and sharing of, you know, tips and tricks and how we do stuff, which will really benefit, I think, the airlines and IATA as well.
And I think great, because that kind of benchmarking and tips and tricks can then filter out of beyond airlines and across the industry. I think it's wonderful, really exciting, and is in alignment with some of the work that we're doing here in the UK with the UK Women in Aviation and Aerospace Charter. Would you speak a little bit to what you would see is the value or necessity or non-necessity, whatever you think, about having a charter? I mean, we think it's important. Why would you say such a charter is necessary or not necessary?
I mean, I think it's absolutely needed. I say that on the one hand, and at the same time, I think that's a real shame that in 2021 I'm still saying that a charter around, you know, ensuring equality and empowerment of women in aviation is necessary. But I absolutely strongly believe that it is. I think that anybody in the industry, well, actually, generally, just take the industry out of it for just one moment. Generally, we know that there is a huge amount of work to do on achieving gender equality, gender empowerment, and of course, that is one of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals as well. So that is known, that is accepted. When we look at our industry, so the aviation, we know, anyone who's in aviation knows the gender representation is very poor. Pre-COVID, about 5%, I think, of all pilots were female. That's probably going to be less post-COVID, because we do know that COVID has had a disproportionate effect on female workers, not just in aviation, but generally throughout the world. But also in the airline industry, we know that, again, pre-COVID, less than 3% of airline CEOs were women. And I think that's abysmal. That's just you know, a terrible statistic. And then when I look at IATA as a proxy as well, you know, it's a truly international organization. It's all over the world, which is absolutely fantastic. And when I look at the workforce, it's roughly 50-50 men to women, which is brilliant. But only one member of the executive is a female, and that's myself, in amongst 15-16 men. And only 22% of senior roles at IATA are filled by women as well. So, you know, just looking in my own backyard, there's a bit of a way to go. And then I think, you know, one element of the charter that you've spoken to is about setting internal targets, and it's setting internal targets for gender diversity in senior management. And I am personally a great believer of what gets measured gets done. And I'm a great believer in setting targets, because otherwise it's too easy not to really progress things. And one of the things that I like to think about in terms of the UK particularly is there have been very recent initiatives like the Hampton Alexander Review that was backed by the UK government, launched in 2016, I think it was, and it had a target to achieve 33% of board positions on FTSE 100 and FTSE 250 companies being women. It set up this team, a great CEO, Denise Wilson, who I used to work with at National Grid, really passionate and, a real brilliant, inspirational female leader. And it had its sole purpose of achieving that target. The deadline was end of the year last year. It achieved that target, which is absolutely brilliant, which shows, if you have something, you work hard to achieve it, you can get there. What it also showed, though, on the Hampton Alexander piece is that whilst they achieved their target on the board piece, the whole executive piece was now needing to be similarly reviewed and similarly targeted and similarly moved forwards over the next couple of years. So in summary, therefore, my view is, unfortunately, but it's the way that it is, these things are needed. They are needed, I believe, as a temporary measure to get us to a place where things are equal, and then we can hopefully moderate and manage ourselves such that we then retain that gender balance moving forwards.
Oh, thank you. That was really lucid. I loved some of the words you've used there: commitment, measurement. I think too, and that the 5% of pilots, that has remained unchanged for more than a century. However, where I see a ray of hope is, the pandemic has had a disproportionate effect on the number of women generally at work and in the workplace. What we've got different now than other pandemics, world wars, great global crises is we have technology, we have communication, and I'm an optimist. I think the initiative like 25 in 25 and the Charter, as you say, they may bring up the next necessary step, but they are bringing up the next necessary step rather than a homogenous, so this doesn't feel right. So and I'm incredibly grateful to you for taking the time to share with us, about your background, about what you're doing today, and about 25 in 25 and your thoughts on the Charter. Before we wrap up, if anybody wants to find out more about 25 in 25, where would they go to?
So we have a website at Iata, iata.org, www.iata.org, and it will be on our website. You may have to navigate through to find it or put it into the search function, but it will be in there. Equally, just a Google search, if you put in 25 by 2025 and Iata, then it should bring up the various publications that we have released in relation to it. And there was quite a bit of that, actually, because for the things that we've discussed, this was a great and novel initiative on behalf of both Iata and the airlines. So probably those are the two areas that people could go to from their laptops, from their computers. And if they want to find out more specifically, or if people are looking to join the commitment and join the Charter, then they should either contact myself or, as I said, Jane Hoskinson at Iata, who will be able to provide all the details that people will need.